It's terrible. I'm a minute late. Not very TE of me, is it? Nonetheless, hello everyone. Let's see. For those who may be watching, I predict that most of you will be actually watching post-stream. So I already have some questions that are lined up, the top 4 questions. And if by the time that I answer the 4th question, there are really no questions still in the chat, then I guess that'll be a wrap. That said, I'll just jump right into it. If you don't already know me, my name is Extraverted Thinking. I'm also known as TE. And I'm one of the 8 cognitive functions. I'm assuming that many of you have already seen the video where I introduced myself in. One of the things about that video that really stood out to me was there are 2 different ways that I can usually show up. And I'm sure that most people would assume the other way, which is a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more, dare I say, even pushy. But I think that view of how I show up is just a little bit too stereotypical. Not enough people are able to see or even identify a healthy extroverted thinking type because they're so used to just identifying them if they are mean and rude. So that being said, that actually brings me to my first question, which is a lot of people like to ask, why is TE so mean? Of course, that would depend on what you mean by mean. Extroverted thinking, I tend to see things and it just makes sense to me that we should take this course of action. Sometimes, or dare I say even oftentimes, I forget how much things might make sense to me, but it might not make sense to other people. So if I see somebody trying to take a mattress upstairs and they fail to bring the mattress because they are not shifting it in the correct way, it's just obvious to me that, oh, you should actually turn it up this way instead. Whereas maybe to other people, it's probably a newsflash. There's some other things that are pretty obvious to me, like, putting a cover letter on your resumes if you really want to stand out and get noticed. Just a bunch of other things that, we don't have to go down that list. But when these things stand out to me, then I just kind of say it how it is. And a lot of times that could maybe come off a little bit more bitter, or biting is actually a better term for it. But in actuality, I'm not even usually thinking about it. Sometimes I am baffled, though. Sometimes I am baffled that people did not identify that this is the best course of action. And if I'm operating in somebody who, of course, doesn't know type, and so they're assuming that everybody processes and views the world the same way that they do, then the individual could actually assume that this person, this being, is just choosing to ignore the obvious, which now I know is obviously not the case. So sometimes, yes, I guess I can come off a bit mean, a bit abrasive, but it's very rarely intentional. Anyway, moving on. The second question that's often asked is, why can TE dominance come off introverted? This is another great question. This actually happens quite a lot. A lot of fictional characters that we would assume to be INTJ or ISTJ are actually really ENTJ and ESTJ. This is because, well, we have to redefine how we view the word extroversion. When we think of extroversion, a lot of people tend to think of extroversion as very boisterous, very loud, very even sometimes abrasive. And so it's like, okay, if you're dealing with a very abrasive person, that is an ENTJ. And if you're dealing with somebody who's more calm, reserved, has a composure to them, and that's an INTJ. It's not that simple. In actuality, TE is not really a function that has to do with people. It's more about productivity. Therefore, I get my biggest hits from getting things done, from checking things off of my list, from seeing progression. And so, because I see things progressing forward, then that's what's recharging me. That's what's exciting me. Therefore, if somebody, anybody, if everybody is getting in the way of me getting anything done, not only will I probably come off a little bit more abrasive, a little bit more mean, a little bit more irate, but on top of that, I'm not going to want to be around those people because they're getting in the way of my flow state. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm an introvert. Maybe socially introverted, sure. But at least in Jungian terms, a TE dominant is always going to be more focused on productivity. It's going to be more focused on getting the thing done than a TE auxiliary type would be. It has very little to do with anything having to do with how loud this person might be. So let's say, for example, Light Yagami from Death Note. A lot of people tend to type him as an INTJ. I think this is a very novice view of typology, because in actuality, he's most focused, not necessarily on NI work. His NI is very superb, but his focus is actually in ranking as high as possible in his schoolwork, in his stats, whatever it might be, studying, and then also just making things happen. Even the way that he tried to rule the world in that sense, it seems like a very much a TE dominant way of operating. So even though he tended to stay in his room for most of the time, usually when he was in his room, he was working. It wasn't really a lot of just pure NI time. It was him being productive in some way, shape, or form. And of course, there's a lot more to that, but that is actually one example of a TE dominant who could come off socially introverted, but is actually an extrovert. And the short answer to the question, like I said previously, is that TE has nothing really to do with people. It has more to do with productivity. And so just because an ETJ is not really engaging with many people or not very boisterous does not mean that they are not an ETJ. So moving on to the next question. Can TE also TI? This is a great question because I've witnessed a lot of individuals who use me as a dominant or auxiliary function really speak highly of themselves when it comes to introverted thinking. Technically, we can TI, but do we have the energy to TI? That's the real question. I think that anybody who really understands the function TI would also be able to understand that the function in and of itself is a lot more nuanced and complicated than people might make it out to seem. So it's not just about pedanticism. Pedanticism. Is that even a word? See, TI would probably know that. But being pedantic, it's not just about that. There's so much more to it. And in short terms, I am most interested in getting things done. I am most interested in accomplishing things and being productive, not necessarily tinkering away and trying to figure out philosophical things that will never really produce fruit. So when it comes down to maybe figuring the details of certain information out or the inner workings of a piano or something, I could go ahead and do that. I could learn how to build the piano, but usually I'd be more focused on learning how to maybe export the piano to where its destination needs to go in an effective manner. I'd be more interested in learning how to just play the piano, to make a profit off of it. And why would I take so much time to learn all of the inner workings of the piano and the keyboard if there are people that can delegate to go and do that for me? So if the piano does stop being effective, if it becomes ineffective in some way, well, I know the people that I can go and talk to be able to fix it. They're the ones who try to understand the inner workings of the keyboard, so that way I do not have to do that. It's the same way like when you're watching police shows with the task force, you'll have a lot of the TI people who will have all of the details and the information about the case. And I'm just taking whatever is necessary so that I can give them a command, an action. So by the end of me receiving everything, then I'm usually the one that's like, okay, you go and do this, you go and do that, and you should probably go and do this. Now get there. So can TETI? It can. I can. But do I always want to? Not really. I'll leave that to TI. And that brings me to the fourth and final question for right now. What about FE? Can TEFE? Now, a lot of TJ women have been confused for FJs. In more psychological terms, a lot of TE women have been confused for using FE. Now, a lot of this is due to social norms and I guess a lot of like social customization of some sort. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like TI. FE is a lot more nuanced than many might think. It's not just about being nice. Now, FE and I are both extroverted judging functions. We're the only two. So there's going to be a lot of overlap. Sometimes there are times where I have to do FE's work for FE. And sometimes there are times where FE has to do some work for me, because we'll cover the same ground. But at the end of the day, to answer that question once again, can TEFE? To an extent, yes. But it's very tiresome. And it definitely does not come naturally. There are so many complex and intricate things that go on in social spheres that I honestly quite do not have time for. And if anything, I would rather delegate to FE. If I were presented the option of managing the projects of a business and making sure that everybody is like making their benchmarks for the projects, or to just make sure that everybody in the business is getting along and handling any of their conflicts or any of their needs of some sort, making sure that everybody is happy, I would much rather take on the projects. I would delegate the happiness and everything to the next person. That's not to say that I'm going to be mean to my coworkers or to the employees that are underneath me. It's just to say that I have what I would consider more important things to focus on. And it takes much more energy for me to actively be involved in resolving conflict and communicating constructive criticism in a tactful manner and trying to get into people's business in that way. It's not really what I'm here for. I'm really here to just make sure that the projects are getting done, we're making profit, and we're moving on from there. I think that's pretty much all that I have for you guys. Once again, Denzel did not really promote this too heavily, did he? No matter. There's a reason why he had me go up first. I usually have the least to say anyway. So I guess this ends our stream. Thank you everyone for watching. For those of you who will be watching post-stream, as most of you do, be sure to leave a like, leave comments. There's a chance that you'll see me again. Thank you, Ja. And well, that's somebody who uses me as an auxiliary function. Anyway, I'll talk to you all next time.